Worldcoin went live last week, and its digital identity service has faced some criticism over privacy concerns. For those who don't know, here is how the technology works. Users sign up through Worldcoin's app, then visit what's called an orb for retina scanning and identity verification. Users then receive a digital passport and world tokens. Yesterday, we learned that several countries in Europe, including Germany and France, are investigating the project. That's according to Reuters. And last week, the UK's data watchdog told CNBC it's looking into the launch of WorldCoin. The Information Commissioner's Office also said that organizations must conduct a data protection impact assessment before any processing that is likely to result in high risk, like special category biometric data. Now, you're speaking with us from the UK today, so I'm hoping to get your reaction to this new WorldCoin project. What do you think about those privacy concerns, including those from regulators in your country?
Well, what's really interesting is that there seems to be privacy is the word of the moment, right? The objective, the driver behind the whole project is actually privacy, or at least protection of data. And what the founders of the project are saying is this is a way that we have found to move the conversation on how we secure access and how we ensure that people accessing their online personas in whatever form that takes are the real people and are not AI and are not bots. But it's that very same sword, which turned out to be double-edged, which gives rise to the concern about data on the other side of things, namely the potential for losses or hacks or breaches or whatever it is. So it's the age-old discussion of how to provide secure access to your systems without creating an incentive for or a system where that data can be lost. So it's a really interesting move forward in the discussion, and I don't think it's as straightforward as saying, oh, they're collecting loads of personal data, this must be scary. The question is always, what are they collecting and why are they collecting it? How are they processing it? And how are they protecting it?
Now, it's important to point out that we reached out to WorldCoin for comment last week on those privacy concerns and inquiries. A spokesperson told us that the WorldCoin Foundation complies with all laws and regulations governing the processing of personal data in the markets where WorldCoin is available, including the General Data Protection Regulation and the UK Data Protection Act. It stressed that from its inception, WorldCoin was designed to protect individual privacy, adding that the project has built a robust privacy program, which includes conducting a, quote, rigorous data protection impact assessments and providing timely responses to individual requests to delete personal data. What do you make of WorldCoin's statement?
Well, it's exactly what one would expect to hear of a company that's taking privacy seriously. You know, they're incredibly intelligent, well-educated in the area of law. What's really interesting, though, is from my perspective, and I come at this from Bittrex Global's perspective as a participant in the market, but with no particular dog in this particular fight, is what's driving the sentiment behind it. And the overall impact is security. Both sides, if you want to call it sides, claim the security high ground, claim the privacy high ground. But actually, what we find is developments happen and protections are available most successfully when people are not entrenched in their position and people actually have discussions. And what's great about the technology that we're working with now is you can actually go have a look at the code. You know, all the hardware is open source, most of the software is open source, and there are discussions being had about how to test those statements of WorldCoin and how to actually challenge them, raise issues, and see how they respond to those issues. So I think it's now we move to a stage in the discussion where it's not enough just to assert things; you need to demonstrate them. And WorldCoin seem to be doing signaling to the market that they're up for those discussions, and that can be really exciting, really interesting, and finally gets the market talking about the thing that Bittrex Global has been talking about for ages, which is the importance of security when it comes to accessing your online presence.
And you touched on this, but does WorldCoin's new identity feature have any implications for the crypto sector in general? And do you think the addition of biometric data on a decentralized blockchain can help or restrict the industry's ability to keep user data secure? What would you say?
Well, that's the million dollar question, right? I mean, the fact is, people are pushing the boundaries of what we can do and how we can really protect users. And that's ultimately what it's all about. We at Bittrex Global are incredibly proud of our record of protecting our users' data. The founders of Bittrex are security engineers. That's what they do. That's their background. There's kind of why they set up Bittrex in the very first place was they looked at the solutions that were out there and realized that they kind of sucked from a security perspective, so they created their own. That was a decade ago, nearly a decade ago. The conversation has moved on a lot since then, and initiatives like this can be seen as part of that wider dialogue. So I think that there's some really interesting discussions to be had. Is this the solution? Is it something that's coming around the corner? I don't know. I wish I did know. But I think having that conversation is incredibly useful and really gets the whole industry thinking about that key issue of security.
Following the launch of Worldcoin, do you think we'll see more projects that incorporate AI and digital assets? What is your outlook, especially amid the backdrop of these privacy concerns?
Yeah, I think it's undeniable that this is going to kickstart a whole bunch of initiatives. And I'm really excited to see what those look like, because that's when technology is at its best. To think that we've solved all of these issues some time ago would be naive. Like, unfortunately, it's the case that bad actors continue innovating. So that means that we, good actors, have to continue to innovate too. Exactly what form that will take, well, that's a discussion that will be developed over the coming weeks, months, and frankly, years. But it's not a stationary target. You've always got to be weighing up those competing concerns of protection of data and protection of accounts. And the fact is, the more data you collect in order to protect accounts, the bigger a target you place on that for bad actors and hackers and all the rest of it. So, this is a dynamic discussion, but one that I think is going to be absolutely critical to the sector going forwards.
Switching gears, last time you were on the show was in June. That's when you highlighted the regulatory advancements in crypto in places like Europe, where you're speaking from today, as well as Dubai, Hong Kong, and Japan. At the time, you said there's compulsion for crypto firms to leave the US amid a lack of regulatory clarity here. But since then, we've been seeing some regulatory advancements in the US. Just last week, 2 crypto bills passed a key vote in the House Financial Services Committee. The Financial Innovation and Technology for the 21st Century Act would establish clearer guidelines for digital assets, and the Blockchain Regulatory Uncertainty Act would limit miners from being treated as money transmitters. What do you make of those developments, and do you think the advancements instill confidence that regulatory clarity here in the US is a priority and is in fact achievable?
Well, I think this is evidence that the sector, but also people as a whole, are just crying out for some kind of proper framework to do crypto. Because the fact is, right now, people are being doubly failed. They're being failed because there isn't a clear path for the industry to actually provide those products and services to people in the US that they want. And there are people in the US are sitting there looking at their counterparts around the world and saying, hey, this is unfair. Why can't I get a piece of that? There's so many advantages that are not being made available to me because of the lack of clarity. So they're being failed on that regard, but they're being failed on a second level by not having the protections that a proper fit-for-purpose bespoke regulatory regime can afford to them. The reason that regulation matters is not so that lawyers like me can feel good about ourselves, but it's so that customers, users, and participants of all sorts can be protected. That's why we have gone through a very long process over decades, creating proper regulatory regimes for financial services in the traditional sector. We would be idiots not to take those same lessons and apply them just because you put the word crypto in front of it. So I think what we're seeing in the US is finally a realization that we need those protections. Otherwise, we're going to suffer the same consequences. You wouldn't put your money in an unregulated bank. Why would you put your money in an unregulated exchange? You wouldn't. But you need there to be a regulatory framework for that exchange in order to be able to benefit from those protections.
Last time you were on the show, you also weighed in on the SEC's crackdown on crypto exchanges, including Bittrex US. Bittrex Global, which you say operates outside of the US and never accepted US customers, was included in the SEC charges. Bittrex US filed for bankruptcy in May, a few weeks after announcing it planned to close operations in America amid regulatory uncertainty. Where does that case stand now, specifically as it pertains to Bittrex Global, your company?
Well, the case goes through the U.S. the U.S. legal system now. And I'm not a U.S. lawyer, but I've been given a crash course in litigation in the U.S. and what that looks like. We submitted our application to dismiss at the end of June, and the next stage is for that process, the application to play out. We set out there in accordance with sort of the quite strict rules on what you can and can't say in those kind of submissions. We set out our reasons why we think that the case is misguided and should be dismissed in its entirety. And I think that speaks for itself. We continue to defend ourselves in the U.S. system, but the U.S. legal system is many things, but it's certainly got its complexities and its niceties, and I'm learning about them as we go along. I think the problem that everyone sees, though, is regulation by enforcement is too slow, is too sluggish, and even when you get significant moments, like the Ripple case coming out a couple of weeks ago, you still have to then spend some time figuring out what that means, what the implications are. And so when we say regulation by enforcement is bad, it's not just bad on a sort of conceptual level, although it is. It's bad on a practical level as well, because it means a lot of sitting around waiting, and in the meantime, those protections that I mentioned earlier are still not in place.